I am Joshua, 28, and my parents excluded me from a family dinner because they were ashamed of my blue-collar job. Before I tell you about how I ended up holding the financial leash to my brother's fake empire, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The machine grease never really washes off. It gets deep under your fingernails, settles into the creases of your knuckles, and becomes a permanent part of your skin. It stains your clothes and your life. I was sitting on a cracked plastic crate behind the loading dock of the Riverton frozen foods plant, scrubbing my hands with a rough, industrial paper towel during my strictly timed 15-minute break. The air outside was biting cold, a typical Ohio chill that cuts right through a denim jacket, but the air inside smelled like a nauseating mix of ammonia, stale garlic powder, and freezing metallic exhaust. My shoulders throbbed with a dull, heavy ache from hauling 50-pound boxes of frozen inventory since 10 o'clock the night before. My steel-toed boots felt like they were filled with lead. My phone vibrated in my front pocket. It was not a quick, single buzz. It was a heavy, continuous vibration. Multiple notifications coming in all at once from the family group chat. I pulled the phone out of my pocket with a tired sigh, wiped a thick smudge of machine oil off the cracked glass screen with my wrist, and opened the messaging app. It was from my mother, Evelyn. She had sent a glossy digital invitation card. It had elaborate gold foil borders, an elegant cursive font, and looked like something you would send out for a high society wedding. Below the image was a long, carefully formatted paragraph that she had clearly spent time drafting. Family gala dinner tonight, celebrating our successful kids. Matthew, our brilliant entrepreneur, breaking records and taking the business world by storm. Chloe, our top-tier real estate agent, selling million-dollar homes. Elijah, our future lawyer, making us so proud on his journey to the bar exam. I am so incredibly proud of my accomplished children. Dinner is at 7 p.m. at the Oak Room. Successful kids only. We are dressing to impress. Can't wait to celebrate you all tonight. I stared at the glowing screen. The harsh fluorescent light from the loading dock flickered aggressively above my head, casting long, moving shadows across the concrete floor. I read the message again. Then I read it a third time, my eyes scanning every single line, every single word. My name was not there. Not in the text, not at the bottom as a footnote, not even as an afterthought. Just 3 names. 3 golden children. Then the reactions started rolling in. Matthew sent a sunglasses emoji, followed by a picture of a very expensive vintage champagne bottle resting in a bucket of ice. Chloe replied with a string of red hearts and clapping hands. Elijah, the youngest, just sent a simple thumbs up. Nobody asked, "What about Joshua?" Nobody noticed the missing brother. Or worse, they did notice, and they simply did not care enough to say a single word. A hard, hot lump formed in the back of my throat. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ground together, sending a sharp pain up to my temples. This was not a simple oversight. My mother did not just forget me. This was a public statement. My own mother had just drawn a massive, glaring line in the sand, and she placed me firmly on the outside of it. The words "successful kids" only burned into my mind like a brand. My mind instantly flashed back to the family barbecue just 1 week earlier. I had worked a brutal double shift because a coworker had a family emergency. I showed up to my parents' house 2 hours late, exhausted, still wearing my heavy steel-toed boots and a faded, grease-stained denim jacket. The sprawling backyard was full of my parents' friends from the local country club. Women in expensive summer dresses, men in polo shirts holding craft beers. I quietly grabbed a cheap paper plate, scooped some potato salad, and stood near the grill, hoping to blend into the background. Aunt Martha, a woman who thrived on gossip and judgment, walked up to my mother. I was standing right behind them, entirely invisible to them, as always. Martha took a sip of her Chardonnay, pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me, and asked with a voice dripping in condescension, "Evelyn, darling, what exactly is Joshua doing these days? Is he still working at that facility? The frozen food place?" My mother let out a high-pitched, incredibly nervous laugh. It was the laugh she used when she was trying to hide a mess. She swirled the expensive wine in her glass, refusing to look in my direction even though she knew I was right there. "Oh, Martha, Joshua is just taking some time to figure himself out. He is helping out at a local place for now. You know how young men are today, taking gap years, trying to find their footing in this complicated world." She could not even bring herself to say the word factory. She could not admit to her wealthy friends that her son was a manual laborer who clocked in and out with a punch card. Later that evening, when the sun went down and the wealthy guests finally started getting into their luxury cars and leaving, my mother pulled me violently into the kitchen. Her polite, socially acceptable smile dropped the very second the heavy oak door swung shut. "Why do you have to wear those filthy boots in my house?" she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at my feet. "Why can't you be more like your siblings, Joshua? Matthew just closed a huge logistics deal. Chloe just sold a massive lake house. This job of yours is a complete embarrassment. Look at your hands. You are embarrassing me in front of my friends." I swallowed the heavy humiliation that night. I looked down at my hands, rough and calloused, and said nothing. I told myself she was just stressed about hosting the party. I made excuses for her because she was my mother. But sitting on that plastic crate in the freezing loading dock, staring at the words, "successful kids only," all of my pathetic excuses completely ran out. My thumb hovered heavily over the Leave Group button on the screen. I did not press it. Not yet. A cold, absolute realization washed over my entire body. I finally understood exactly what my family was, how they operated, and exactly what they thought of me. To truly understand how much that text message destroyed my soul, you have to understand exactly how I ended up working the graveyard shift in a frozen food plant in the first place. I was not a slacker. I was not the kid who partied too hard and dropped out. In high school, I had straight A's. I was the captain of the math team. I was accepted into an incredibly prestigious engineering program out of state. I even had a substantial college fund that my grandfather had set up for me right before his funeral. He looked at me on his deathbed and told me to build things that mattered. But when I was 18, just 2 months before I was supposed to leave for my freshman year of college, my father, Richard, made a series of completely catastrophic financial decisions. He gambled our entire family's financial security on a doomed, high-risk commercial real estate venture. The market crashed, his partners backed out, and suddenly, the bank was threatening to foreclose on our childhood home. The massive financial stress almost caused a bitter divorce between my parents. They fought viciously every single night, the screaming and the sound of shattering glass echoing through the thin drywall of our house. One terrible, rainy evening, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. He looked 20 years older. He was defeated, pale, and reeking of cheap whiskey and pure desperation. He cried. I had never seen my father cry before. He begged me to sign over my entire college fund to save the house and keep us off the streets. He promised me, looking me dead in the eyes, that he would pay me back every single penny. He swore to God it was just a temporary setback. I loved my family. I wanted to be the hero, the good son who saved the day. So, with a shaking hand, I signed the legal papers. My future vanished into the bank's accounts, and with it, my lifelong dream of getting an engineering degree. I needed to find work immediately to help keep the lights on and pay off the remaining balance of my father's bad loans to keep a ruthless corporate lawyer from dragging our entire family into a humiliating bankruptcy court. I scoured the town and took the absolute highest-paying job I could find that did not require a college degree. The grueling, back-breaking night shift at the Riverton frozen foods plant. While I was breaking my physical health lifting frozen pallets in sub-zero temperatures, my older brother Matthew was living a vastly different reality. My parents, miraculously finding new credit lines, took out a second mortgage to send him to an elite private business school. They justified it by saying Matthew was an investment. He was the handsome, charismatic, smooth-talking firstborn. He was supposed to be the financial savior of the family name. Matthew absolutely loved the grand narrative. Whenever he visited home from the city, he made sure everyone in a 5-mile radius knew exactly how important and wealthy he was. Just last month, He rolled up to the cracked concrete of our family driveway in a brand new, gleaming silver Porsche 911. He stepped out wearing a tailored Italian suit, smelling of absurdly expensive cologne, wearing a watch that cost more than my yearly salary. I had just gotten home from an exhausting 14-hour double shift. I was covered in mechanical grease, smelling of industrial cleaner and sweat. Matthew tossed his heavy sports car keys in the air, caught them, looked at my stained, cheap work clothes, and smirked a cruel, crooked smile. Working hard or hardly working, little brother? Step back. Make sure you don't scratch the paint on the Porsche with those filthy clothes. A single scratch costs more to fix than you make in a decade down at the icebox. My parents stood on the front porch, clapping for him. They beamed with a level of pride I had never experienced. They rushed down the steps to hug him, completely ignoring me standing right next to him. They never looked at me with that kind of admiration. Not once in my entire life. They conveniently forgot that the very roof over their heads, the electricity lighting their living room, was paid for by the sweat soaking through my shirt. Back in the cold present, still sitting behind the loading dock of the factory, my phone screen suddenly lit up brightly again. It was an incoming video call from my mother. I just stared at it. I let it ring. The screen flashed her smiling, perfectly curated contact photo, mocking my current reality. I watched the green accept button and the red decline button pulse on the screen until the call finally timed out and went to voicemail. Exactly 2 minutes later, a text message arrived from her. I saw you read the message in the group chat. Hope you understand, Joshua. Tonight is just about celebrating real achievements. We wanted an upscale evening. You know we love you very much. But this specific dinner is for the kids who have hit their major career milestones. We don't want you to feel out of place. We will get cheap pizza with you next week. Just the two of us. I locked my phone with a heavy click. I stood up, walked slowly to my rusty metal locker, grabbed a small, spiral-bound notebook I used to keep track of my brutal shift schedules, and flipped to a completely blank page. I took a pen and drew a harsh, dark line straight down the middle of the paper. On the left side, I wrote, "Stay connected." On the right side, I wrote, "Cut ties." Under "Stay connected," I wrote, "Holidays with family," the familiar routine. Maybe, just maybe, they will eventually change and see my worth. Under "Cut ties," I wrote, "No more constant humiliation. No more paying their hidden debts. No more being treated like a dirty secret. Total control of my own salary. Absolute peace of mind." I stared at the handwritten list. The loud, blaring factory bell rang through the building, signaling the end of my break. I picked up a thick black permanent marker and circled the right column over and over again until the ink bled right through the paper. The very moment my grueling shift ended at 6 in the morning, I walked out to my beat-up, rusted sedan in the massive factory parking lot. The sun was just starting to peek over the gray industrial skyline, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, the cold air seeping through the windows. I opened my phone and went straight back into the family group chat. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the successful kids-only message, saving it in a hidden folder. Then, without a single second thought, without a shred of hesitation, I opened my mother's contact and hit block. I blocked my father. I blocked Matthew. Just as my thumb hovered over my sister Chloe's name to block her too, a direct message from her popped up on my screen. "Hey Josh, saw Mom's crazy text in the chat. She can be so incredibly harsh and tone-deaf sometimes. Are you holding up okay? You really shouldn't let her get to you. You know how she gets when she wants to show off." I paused. My thumb froze. Maybe Chloe actually cared. Maybe I had at least one ally left in this deeply broken family. I typed back, letting my guard down just a fraction. "I'm fine, Chloe. I am just so unbelievably tired of being treated like a massive mistake. I gave up everything for this family, and they treat me like trash." Her reply came 3 seconds later, typing rapidly. "I mean, look at it from their perspective, Josh. You kind of bring it on yourself. You have zero ambition. You still work in a freezing warehouse. If you just bought a decent suit, showed up to events, and talked about something other than your depressing factory shifts, she would gladly include you. Don't be so overly dramatic and sensitive. Just call her. Apologize to her for ignoring her video call, so we can all have a peaceful, classy dinner tonight. My blood went completely cold. Felt like ice water in my veins. She was not checking on me. She didn't care about my feelings. She was merely making sure I did not throw a tantrum and ruin their perfect aesthetic for the evening. She was a spy, sent by my mother to manage the situation. I deleted the conversation thread entirely and firmly pressed block on Chloe's number. I drove in silence to my tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. I did not sleep. I brewed a pot of cheap, black coffee. I opened my heavy laptop and searched for the Riverton Technical College. I had spent years paying off my parents' massive debts, neglecting my own life. It was finally time to invest in my own future. I applied for their intensive evening program in industrial engineering and advanced process management. I paid the hefty tuition deposit right then and there using the overtime money I had painstakingly saved over the last 6 months. A few weeks passed, and my life settled into a grueling, exhausting, but incredibly quiet routine. Factory work from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. Sleep for a few hours. Classes from 5 in the evening to 9 at night. Repeat. One rainy Tuesday evening, I was walking down the dimly lit hallway of the technical college, carrying a heavy stack of complex engineering schematics. The hallway smelled distinctly like cheap floor wax and old coffee grounds. I turned a sharp corner and nearly collided head-on with someone wearing a heavy canvas work jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. A stack of heavy books spilled out of his hands and crashed onto the linoleum floor. "Watch where you're going, man," the guy muttered aggressively, scrambling to his knees to pick up the scattered books. I froze instantly. I recognized that panicked, familiar voice anywhere. Elijah! My youngest brother snapped his head up, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. He was supposed to be a highly successful pre-law student at the state university across town. My parents bragged about him constantly to anyone who would listen, telling everyone he was going to be a high-powered corporate lawyer making a massive salary. But the thick textbooks scattered all over the floor were absolutely not law textbooks. They were highly technical, advanced manuals for heavy-duty diesel mechanics and engine repair. "Joshua?" Elijah stammered, his face turning entirely pale, losing all its color. What are you doing here in this building?" "I take night classes for engineering," I said slowly, pointing down to his scattered books. "The real question here is, what exactly are you doing here, Eli? Mom thinks you are sitting in the prestigious university library right now studying for the LSAT. Elijah let out a heavy, defeated sigh and leaned back against the metal lockers, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. "I absolutely hate the law, Josh. I despise it. I have always wanted to work with my hands, to build engines. But you know exactly how they are. If I tell them I want to be a blue-collar mechanic, they will treat me exactly how they treat you. I can't handle being the family disappointment. I can't handle losing my inheritance. So I lie. I lie every single day." I looked down at my little brother. He was absolutely terrified. He was living a miserable double life just to keep his fragile status as a successful kid. "I blocked them all," I told him quietly, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "They uninvited me from the big gala dinner. You were in the group chat. You saw the message." Elijah looked down at his heavy work boots, refusing to meet my eyes. "I saw it. I really did. I'm sorry, Josh. I truly am. But if I stand up and defend you, they will turn all their anger on me. Matthew explicitly told me to just keep my mouth shut and play along. His blatant cowardice stung me deeply, but it also clarified everything in my mind. Elijah was not going to save me. He was too scared. Nobody in that family was ever going to save me. "Keep your head down then, Eli," I said, stepping over his books and walking away down the hall. "But remember this. A cage is still a cage, even if they paint the bars gold." Several long, exhausting months passed. The total silence from my family was deafening, a heavy absence that I felt every day, but it was also the most productive, peaceful time of my entire life. I poured every single ounce of my lingering anger, my resentment, and my boundless energy into my factory work and my evening engineering classes. At the frozen food plant, we were facing a massive, catastrophic logistical bottleneck. The outdated, aging conveyor systems were constantly failing, causing massive delays and resulting in tens of thousands of dollars in spoiled, thawed product every single week. I spent my entire weekend sitting at my small kitchen table, drinking cheap coffee, drafting a brilliant, highly efficient new process flow based on the advanced mechanics I was learning in my college courses. I confidently brought the detailed schematics to my direct shift manager, a man named Wyatt. Wyatt was a notoriously lazy, corner-cutting, arrogant manager who absolutely hated anyone on the floor working harder or smarter than him. He took my carefully drawn blueprints, skimmed them for barely 5 seconds, and tossed them carelessly onto his messy desk. "This is absolute garbage, Joshua. Stick to lifting the heavy boxes. Leave the big thinking and the logistics to actual management. Now get back to the floor before I dock your pay." 2 days later, the regional CEO of the entire corporation, a man named Julian, visited the plant for a massive surprise inspection. Julian was a sharp, brilliant, no-nonsense businessman who had built the massive logistics company from the ground up. I was quietly wiping down a freezing machine on the line when I saw Julian walking the factory floor, accompanied by a very nervous, sweating Wyatt. Wyatt quickly unrolled a very familiar set of large blueprints onto a stainless steel prep table. "Mr. Julian, sir, I have spent the last month developing a revolutionary new process flow that will cut our waste overhead by at least 40%, Wyatt said proudly, pointing directly at my drawings. My blood instantly boiled. I dropped my grease rag onto the floor and marched aggressively over to the table. Luke, an older, grizzled mechanic and my absolute closest friend at the plant, grabbed my arm hard. "Easy, Josh. Step back. You will get fired on the spot." I aggressively pulled my arm away from his grip. "I really don't care anymore, Luke." I walked straight up to the CEO, ignoring Wyatt's panicked expression. "Excuse me, Mr. Julian. I need to correct something. Those are my personal blueprints. I drafted them on my own time. Wyatt rejected them entirely just 2 days ago and told me to get back to lifting boxes." Wyatt's face turned a violent shade of red. He stepped between us. "Mr. Julian, this guy is just a lowly line worker. He's totally delusional. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Julian looked at Wyatt, then looked closely at me, and finally down at the highly complex blueprints. "Prove it," Julian said, his voice calm but authoritative. I didn't hesitate for a microsecond. I pointed out the exact stress metrics on the conveyor belts, quoted the precise load-bearing capacities of the steel rollers, and explained the fundamental mathematical flaw in the current ammonia cooling cycle. I spoke confidently and flawlessly for 5 straight minutes, detailing exactly how my new system would optimize the entire workflow. When I finally finished my presentation, Wyatt was sweating profusely, unable to say a single word. Julian slowly rolled up the large blueprints and tucked them under his arm. He turned to the manager. "Wyatt, go pack up your desk immediately. You are fired for intellectual theft." Julian then turned his sharp gaze back to me. "Joshua, go wash your hands and come directly up to my corner office. We need to talk about a major promotion and a massive change in your salary." That afternoon, I walked out of the freezing factory floor not as a grease-stained line worker, but as the newly appointed plant operations director. The unprecedented promotion came with a salary I had previously only dreamed of, a number that eclipsed anything my parents made. I had real, undeniable authority. I had a massive corner office with a window. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment, drinking a cheap beer to celebrate the biggest victory of my life. I opened my laptop. My mind violently drifted back to my mother's cruel text message. I couldn't shake the memory. I opened a popular free blogging site and started typing furiously. I didn't use any real names, and I changed the locations, but I poured every single raw, bleeding emotion into a long post titled, Successful kids only. When your family invites everyone but you. I wrote extensively about the brutal reality of factory work, the fake pride of wealthy families, the crushing, suffocating weight of being the forgotten, exploited child, and the profound freedom of finally walking away. I hit publish and went to sleep, exhausted. I didn't expect anyone to read it. I thought it would just vanish into the void of the internet. But the internet is a strange, powerful place. By the end of the week, the emotional post had over 2 million views. People were sharing it everywhere. Thousands upon thousands of comments poured in from people who had experienced the exact same toxic family abuse. It resonated deeply. I thought my identity would remain completely anonymous. But I completely forgot about my Aunt Martha. Martha was a deeply bored, viciously manipulative woman who lived exclusively for community drama. She read the viral article and instantly recognized the highly specific details in the story: the country club barbecue, the steel-toed boots, the gala dinner text. She took screenshots of the entire viral blog and posted them directly into the massive local church community Facebook group, deliberately tagging my mother's profile. "Evelyn," Martha wrote publicly for hundreds of people to see, "is this viral article about your son Joshua? How utterly heartbreaking and shameful. The storm I had inadvertently created had officially made landfall. The social fallout was absolutely immediate and incredibly brutal. My phone, which had been blissfully silent for months, started lighting up relentlessly with notifications of blocked voicemails. I finally decided to check my hidden voicemail inbox and listen to the very first message. It was from my father. His voice shook with absolute, unhinged rage. "Joshua, you ungrateful, disgusting brat. How dare you air our private family business on the public internet? Your mother is having a nervous breakdown. She can't even show her face at the country club or the church. You log on and delete that garbage right now, or I swear to God I will hire a lawyer and absolutely ruin your life." There was not a single word of apology in his screaming, not a hint of remorse, just blind fury that their carefully constructed, fake social image was now irreparably tarnished. I didn't delete the post. Instead, I accepted a formal invitation from a local community organizer named Carter. He hosted a highly popular monthly storytelling event downtown called Voices of Riverton. He had read the viral blog, tracked me down through my college email, and asked me to speak live on stage. The venue was a crowded, trendy theater with exposed brick walls and dim lighting. I stood nervously backstage, adjusting the crisp cuffs of my tailored suit. It wasn't a cheap rented suit. It was mine, bought with my own hard-earned director's salary. The promotion had allowed me to finally dress exactly the way I felt on the inside, powerful and in control. Carter patted my shoulder warmly. "You're up, Josh. Tell them your truth." I walked out onto the wooden stage. The bright spotlight blinded me for a second. When my eyes finally adjusted to the glare, I looked out at the massive audience, and my heart completely stopped in my chest. Sitting right there in the third row, glaring up at me with absolute murderous venom, were my parents, Richard and Evelyn, alongside Matthew. Aunt Martha must have maliciously told them about the upcoming event. They came here to intimidate me. They came to stand up and shut me down publicly before I could speak. I gripped the cold metal of the microphone stand. My knuckles turned stark white. I looked directly into my mother's furious eyes. "My parents always told me I was an embarrassment," I started, my voice booming and echoing through the completely silent theater. "They explicitly told me that manual labor was beneath their social standing. So, when they hosted a lavish gala dinner to celebrate their successful kids, they deliberately left me off the guest list." "You are a liar!" my father shouted at the top of his lungs from his seat, standing up aggressively. People in the audience gasped in shock. "You chose to be a pathetic failure, Joshua. Don't you dare blame us for your total lack of ambition." Matthew stood up right next to him, wearing his signature, arrogant smirk, puffing out his chest. "Tell them the real truth, Josh," Matthew yelled so the whole room could hear. "Tell them you're just a filthy factory grunt who's insanely jealous of my massive logistics company." The large crowd murmured anxiously, shifting in their seats. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I let them dig their own social graves in front of 200 people. I waited patiently for the room to quiet down completely before I spoke again. It's entirely true, I said calmly, leaning into the microphone. I worked at a factory. I worked the night shift in a freezer because I gave up my entire college fund when I was 18. I gave it up to pay off my father's massive, catastrophic debts so he wouldn't face a ruthless lawyer and a bankruptcy judge. My father's face drained of all color instantly. He looked like he had been slapped. He sat down heavily in his chair, his mouth hanging open. I turned my full, undivided attention to my older brother. And Matthew, you are completely right. I am in the factory business. In fact, Mr. Julian just promoted me last month to Regional Director of Rivorton Industrial. Matthew's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. His jaw literally dropped. Rivorton Industrial was not just any company. It was the primary supplier and the absolute main creditor for Matthew's so-called empire, a struggling logistics firm that I knew was drowning in severe debt. And Matthew, I continued, my voice cold and sharp as ice. As the new regional director, I personally reviewed the corporate accounts this morning. Your firm is 4 months behind on its payments. You owe us over $500,000. I signed the legal paperwork today to officially call in the massive debt. Your company is done. The silence in the theater was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. You could literally hear a pin drop. My mother covered her mouth with both of her trembling hands, tears of pure, unadulterated horror streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Matthew looked like he was going to vomit right there in the aisle. They had come to this event to publicly humiliate a lowly factory worker, and instead, they found themselves staring at the man holding the financial leash to their entire existence. De la koan kak they doi tat ca, kai tua koi kung de lay lai duak win kim so kuak doi min, kam on ban de kien and kung tua den day, ban that tuet voi, hey jup tua like video va ben luan so one ben dui, de tua beat ban de dong han kung tua toi day. Junai kong chi jup nu nuoi han tim thay ka chuyen nai. Ma kan cho tua beat rang and hung tre niam qua tua ko wai nia voi ai du. Suung ho qua ben la dong luk lon not de tua tip tiu si chia se and hung fan kan lai qua han trin ne. The emotional aftermath of that night was brutal, swift, and entirely irreversible. I walked slowly off the stage to a thunderous standing ovation from hundreds of strangers who had just witnessed my entire life story unfold. But surprisingly, I didn't feel like wildly celebrating. I didn't feel a rush of euphoric joy. I just felt a heavy, exhausted sense of absolute finality. The war was finally over. As I walked through the crowded theater lobby toward the glass exit doors, Pastor Nathan, the respected head of my parents' church community, approached me hesitantly. He had been sitting quietly in the back row the entire time. He looked deeply shaken and profoundly sad. Joshua, Pastor Nathan said softly, reaching out to shake my hand. I had absolutely no idea. Your mother specifically told the congregation that you moved away out of state because you fell in with a bad crowd and got into drugs. I am so incredibly sorry we didn't see the truth of what was happening in that house. The brutal truth doesn't wear a shiny, expensive suit, Pastor, I replied quietly, releasing his hand. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. The large parking lot was mostly empty, except for a highly chaotic scene rapidly unfolding near the bright street lamps at the edge of the property. A massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck was backed up directly to Matthew's gleaming silver Porsche 911. The burly tow truck driver was aggressively hooking heavy steel chains to the front axle of the sports car. Matthew was frantically waving his arms in the air, screaming hysterically at the driver. My parents stood completely frozen on the sidewalk, looking entirely lost and utterly defeated. You can't take this car. Do you know who I am? I need to call my corporate lawyer, Matthew yelled, his voice cracking violently with sheer panic. The tow truck driver, a massive guy wearing a neon high-vis vest, just casually chewed his gum, completely unbothered, and handed Matthew a bright yellow clipboard. Read the legal paperwork, buddy. You missed 3 consecutive lease payments to the luxury rental agency. The car isn't yours. It never was. Sign right here on the dotted line, or I call the local cops and report it stolen. A rental. The ultimate symbol of the golden child's massive success. The very car he used to cruelly mock my greasy boots and my factory job was absolutely nothing but a rented, hollow prop. He didn't even own it. He was drowning in massive corporate debt, desperately faking a rich, lavish lifestyle while my parents foolishly funded his grandiose delusions by secretly taking out more loans. My father suddenly saw me watching the pathetic scene from the top of the theater steps. He took a desperate step toward me, raising his shaking hand in a pleading gesture. "Joshua, please wait. Please, son. We need to talk about this massive corporate debt call. You can't just destroy your own brother's logistics company. We will lose everything we have left." I stood tall on the steps and looked down at the man who had selfishly stolen my bright future and my college fund just to save his own skin. I looked over at the arrogant brother who had treated me like dirt on his shoe for a decade. I looked at the mother who erased my very existence from her life simply because I wasn't shiny enough to show off to her shallow country club friends. "I'm not destroying anything, Richard," I said, my voice incredibly steady, completely devoid of any anger or pity. "I'm just doing my job as a director. Successful kids only, right? That's what you all wanted." I turned my back on them forever, walked calmly over to my reliable, beat-up sedan, got in, and drove away into the night. In the glowing rearview mirror, I watched the massive tow truck pull the silver Porsche out into the busy street, dragging Matthew's fake empire and my family's toxic lies away with it. For the very first time in my entire life, I took a deep breath, and I breathed in the pure, intoxicating air of total, absolute freedom. The days immediately following that night at the theater felt incredibly strange. For my entire adult life, I had operated under a crushing weight of obligation and guilt. I always thought about my parents' approval. I always worried about my father's debts. I always measured my worth against Matthew's fake success. But when I woke up the morning after the storytelling event, my apartment was completely silent, and for the very first time, the silence did not feel lonely. It felt like absolute peace. I threw myself entirely into my new role as the regional director of Rivorton Industrial. My new salary was substantial, enough that I completely paid off the loan on my beat-up sedan in a single afternoon and started looking at real estate. I traded the freezing, ammonia-scented air of the factory floor for a quiet corner office with a large mahogany desk. But I never forgot where I came from. I made it a strict point to walk the production lines every single day. I knew the names of the mechanics. I knew who was struggling with the night shifts. I knew exactly how it felt to be invisible, and I refused to let anyone in my facility feel that way. That was how I met Dylan. Dylan was 19 years old, working the brutal overnight logistics shift. He was a skinny kid with dark circles under his eyes, and he always wore a faded canvas jacket that was 2 sizes too big. I noticed him because he stayed an hour after his shift ended every morning just to study the repair manuals for the old conveyor belts. He reminded me exactly of myself a decade earlier. One morning, I walked down to the loading dock and handed Dylan a hot cup of coffee. He jumped, surprised to see the regional director standing there. I asked him why he was reading the advanced manuals instead of going home to sleep. He looked down at his boots and told me the truth. His mother was sick. He had dropped out of community college to pay her medical bills. He was trying to figure out how to get a promotion to the maintenance team because the hourly wage was slightly higher. I did not give him empty sympathy. I gave him a clear path. I told Dylan to come to my office at noon. I personally enrolled him in the corporate apprenticeship program, the same technical track I had used to climb out of the trenches. I made him my direct mentee. Over the next 3 years, I watched Dylan transform. He moved from the loading dock to lead floor mechanic. He bought his own car. He paid off his mother's hospital debts. Watching him succeed was the most rewarding experience of my professional career. I was building a life based on mutual respect, hard work, and genuine support. Meanwhile, 3 years slipped by without a single word from my blood relatives. The time jump felt like a blur of positive momentum. I bought a beautiful, 3-bedroom house with a large backyard and a massive oak tree. I hosted weekend barbecues for my coworkers, the people who had actually stood by me. But the past always has a funny way of knocking on your door when you least expect it. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening in late October. I was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing quarterly budget reports, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I normally let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Josh. The voice was thin, raspy, and completely exhausted. Took me a full 5 seconds to recognize it. It was my youngest brother, Elijah. Elijah. It has been a long time, I said evenly. I did not sound angry. I just sounded indifferent. I know. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. I got your new number from a guy at the Riverton Union office. Josh, I need to see you. Just for 20 minutes. Please. It is about Mom and Dad. I looked around my quiet, peaceful kitchen. I had fought incredibly hard for this sanctuary. I did not want to let the chaos back in. But Elijah sounded absolutely desperate. I will meet you at the diner on 4th Street in 30 minutes. I told him. Do not bring anyone else. When I walked into the neon-lit diner, I almost did not recognize my brother. Elijah was supposed to be the golden child destined for a high-powered law firm. Instead, he looked completely broken. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and his hands were shaking as he held his coffee mug. I slid into the booth across from him. What happened, Eli? I asked, skipping the small talk. Elijah took a deep breath. Everything collapsed, Josh. After that night at the theater, when you pulled the corporate credit line from Matthew's logistics company, the dominoes fell fast. Matthew didn't just owe your company money. He owed everyone. He was totally over-leveraged. When word got out that Riverton Industrial dropped him, his other investors panicked. The banks froze his accounts. I listened without showing a shred of emotion. That is standard business consequence. He signed the contracts. It's worse than that, Elijah continued, his voice cracking. Mom and Dad didn't just co-sign for his cars. They took out a third mortgage on the family house to cover his fraudulent operating costs. They completely drained their retirement accounts. Matthew filed for total bankruptcy and moved out of state to avoid the creditors. He just ran away and left them holding the bag. I stared at him. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. So, the brilliant entrepreneur took the money and ran. What does this have to do with me? Elijah looked terrified to say the next words. Dad had a mild heart attack 6 months ago. The stress from the debt collectors broke him. Mom has been taking care of him, but she is heavily medicated for anxiety. The bank hired a ruthless corporate lawyer to serve them with final foreclosure papers last week. They have absolutely zero inheritance left. No savings. They are going to lose the house by Christmas, Josh. They are going to be on the street. I leaned back in the vinyl booth. I remembered the night I sat in my father's kitchen, 18 years old, signing away my entire college fund to save that exact same house. I remembered the promise he made to pay me back, a promise he broke without a second thought. I am genuinely sorry to hear about Dad's health, I said firmly, but I do not see how this involves me. I am not part of that family anymore. Mom made that crystal clear in her text message. Elijah reached into his worn canvas jacket and pulled out a battered, rectangular cardboard box. He pushed it across the sticky diner table toward me. Mom asked me to give this to you. She knows how successful you are now. She knows about your promotion, your house, your salary. She says that family has to stick together in times of crisis. She expects you to step up and pay the legal fees to stop the foreclosure. She said it is your filial duty. I looked at the cardboard box. I did not touch it. She expects me to step up? Did she use those exact words? Elijah nodded miserably. Yes, she said you owe it to them for raising you. She said the divorce rumors are flying around their church community, and she can't handle the public humiliation of losing the house. She needs your money, Josh. I felt a dark, familiar twist in my gut. It was the old conditioning, the deeply ingrained, toxic guilt that told me I had to set myself on fire to keep my parents warm. But the man sitting in that diner booth was not the terrified teenager who signed away his future. I was a director. I was a man who knew his own worth. "Take the box back, Eli," I said coldly. "Please, Josh, just open it. Read her letter. If I don't report back that you read it, she will scream at me for days." I looked at my younger brother's terrified eyes. He was still trapped in the cage. I reached out, pulled the box toward me, and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on top of some wrinkled tissue paper, was my old, worn-out leather baseball glove from Little League. Next to it was a faded, framed photograph of me and my mother from when I was 7 years old, standing on the front porch of the house they were about to lose. And right in the center was a thick envelope with my name written in her perfectly practiced cursive handwriting. I opened the envelope and pulled out the 3-page letter. I read the entire thing in silence. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Evelyn did not write a single word of genuine apology. She did not say she was sorry for hiding my existence from her friends. She did not apologize for treating me like a peasant while I paid her bills. Instead, she rewrote history. "My dearest Joshua," the letter began, "I know we have had our minor misunderstandings in the past. You were always so sensitive and quick to anger. But a mother's love is unconditional. Your father and I are facing our darkest hour. Matthew made some naive business mistakes, but he meant well. Now the bank's lawyer is circling us like a vulture. We are facing total ruin." I scanned down to the second page. This was where the clause came out. "We hear you are doing incredibly well. We hear about your massive salary and your beautiful new home. God has blessed you so that you can be the true savior of this family. We need $80,000 to halt the foreclosure and cover the immediate medical debts. This is not a request, Joshua. It is your absolute duty as a son. After everything we sacrificed to put food on your table when you were a child, the very least you can do is protect your parents in their old age. Family is everything. Do the right thing and call the bank tomorrow morning. Love, Mom." I read the final paragraph twice. I stared at the words until the ink blurred. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was demanding my money. She still viewed me as nothing more than a convenient ATM, a disposable resource to be drained whenever the golden child failed them. The sheer entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. I carefully folded the letter back along its original creases and slid it precisely into the envelope. I placed the envelope back into the cardboard box, right on top of the old baseball glove. I placed the lid securely back on the box. I looked up at Elijah. He was staring at me, holding his breath, waiting for the classic Joshua reaction. He was waiting for me to pull out my checkbook, shoulder the massive burden, and save the day at the absolute expense of my own peace. "Are you going to do it?" Elijah asked, his voice trembling. "Are you going to pay the lawyer?" I rested my forearms on the table and looked my brother dead in the eye. "No, Eli. I am not giving them a single dime. I am not paying the bank. I am not paying the medical bills. I am not saving the house." Elijah's eyes widened in genuine shock. "But they will lose everything. They will be homeless. How can you just sit there and let that happen? They are your parents. They made their choices," I said, my voice completely steady and brutally calm. "They chose to invest everything they had, and everything I had, into Matthew's illusions. They chose to fund his fake lifestyle. They chose to humiliate me. They chose to exclude me from their perfect family narrative because my boots were dirty. They drew a hard line, Eli. I am simply respecting the boundary they created. She is going to go crazy, Josh. She is going to say you abandoned them. She can say whatever she wants to her country club friends. It does not change the truth. They did not love me when I was poor and struggling. They only remembered I existed when my bank account got large enough to solve their catastrophic mistakes. That is not love. That is extortion." I stood up from the diner booth and threw a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffees. I picked up the cardboard box and handed it back to Elijah. He took it reluctantly, looking at it like it was a live bomb. "What do you want me to tell her?" Elijah asked quietly. I want you to send her a text message right now, I instructed. Type exactly what I say, word for word. Elijah pulled out his phone and opened the family group chat, the same chat I had been excluded from years ago. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Tell her this, I said, dictating clearly. Joshua read the letter. He hopes you take care of your health and find the necessary support through your community. He is not able to step back into the role of financial savior. He wishes you absolute peace, but he will not be contacting you again. Elijah typed the words. His hands shook, but he hit send. I watched the message deliver. There was no going back now. The final bridge was completely burned to ash, and I was the one holding the match. You need to get out too, Eli. I told him gently before I walked away. Stop living a lie. Go fix engines. Be happy, because if you stay in their web, they will drain you until there is nothing left. Good luck, brother. I walked out of the diner and stepped into the cool, refreshing autumn rain. I got into my truck and drove back to my house. The driveway was full of cars. When I opened the front door, the incredible smell of slow-roasted barbecue and fresh garlic bread hit me immediately. The house was alive with loud laughter and music. In the kitchen, Luke, my old factory mentor, was standing at the stove, arguing playfully with Dylan about the correct way to sear a steak. Carter, the community organizer who had given me the stage to tell my story, was setting the large dining room table. Several other friends from the plant and the engineering college were sitting in the living room, sharing stories and drinking cold beers. Dylan looked up when I walked in. Hey boss, you're late. We almost started without you. Grab a plate, the food is finally ready. I took off my wet jacket and hung it by the door. I looked around the warm, brightly lit room at the people who had shown up for me when I had absolutely nothing. These people did not care about my job title. They did not care about my salary. They cared about my character. They respected my work ethic. They were the people who stood by me in the freezing trenches of the factory floor. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a plate, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Luke and Dylan. We laughed, we ate, and we celebrated nothing in particular other than the simple fact that we were together. I finally understood the profound difference between blood and family. Blood is simply a biological accident. It is a genetic lottery. But family? Family is a conscious choice. Family is the group of people who invite you to the dinner table regardless of what kind of shoes you are wearing. Family is the people who never make you feel like you have to earn your seat. I had lost my blood relatives, but standing in that kitchen, surrounded by genuine warmth and unconditional respect, I knew with absolute certainty that I had found my true family. I never heard from my parents again. I heard through the grapevine that the bank finally foreclosed on the house. They moved into a small, rented apartment on the edge of town. Matthew never came back to help them. Elijah eventually found the courage to drop out of pre-law, move to a different state, and open his own diesel repair shop. I am genuinely proud of him for escaping. As for me, I continue to build my life. I continue to promote the hard workers, the overlooked, and the exhausted. I built a life that I am fiercely proud of, and I built it with my own 2 hands. Before we end this video, I want to pause here and speak directly to you. If there is one crucial lesson you take away from my story, let it be this: financial abuse disguised as parental love is still abuse. We are deeply conditioned by society to believe that we owe our parents our entire existence simply because they raised us. But respect, love, and loyalty must be a two-way street. You do not owe anyone your future, your mental health, or your hard-earned security, especially not to people who only value you for what they can extract from your wallet. Setting a firm boundary with toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It takes immense courage to walk away from the people who are supposed to protect you. But sometimes, walking away is the only way you will ever learn how to truly breathe. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to redefine what family means to you. If my story resonated with you today, or if you agree that protecting your own peace is more important than toxic family loyalty, please leave the word "good" in the comments below, or tell me which part of the story hit home for you the most. Your interaction helps this channel grow, and it helps these stories reach the people who desperately need to hear them. Thank you for listening, and remember to always know your worth.